there recognized us, which was really cool because it was such a different take on the characters, right?
Hey, Jordanne, I'm going to interrupt you for a second because it just hit 11. So that means we're officially live, and I'm going to introduce us all. Or I'll introduce myself, and then you guys can introduce yourselves. This is a speculative fiction chat, and we're going to talk today about steampunk, which we've already been kind of discussing. And thank you to those of you who came a little early while we were getting our technical difficulties worked out. But my name is Kim Wells, and I have written a couple of novels. I have not yet ventured into steampunk, although my Halloween costume this year was steampunk. And I want to do a story. I have a graphic I want to show you in a little while that's like the story I want to write. You guys can look at it. And then we have Laxmi, Hariharan. Did I get it right this time? Closer. I'm gonna practice that, and she'll introduce herself, and then we have Jordanne Fuller, and so we're all gonna talk about ourselves and fiction and pop culture and steampunk today, and magic realism as well. So go ahead, Lakshmi, and say hello.
Hi. So I'm Laxmi, and I'm calling in from London, and really pleased to be here. So Kim and I started this chat now 3 weeks going, and we're going strong, and we're really enjoying it. And we tend to hang out every Saturday at this time. That's 5 p.m. UK time, 11 a.m. Central CST, Central Time. And that's 12 noon EST.
Eastern.
And I think it's around 10:30 in India, if anyone's tuning in from India. So that's us. It's I'd like to think the very first transatlantic lab show that we have been doing. And we tend to talk all nerdy stuff, largely around speculative fiction. So today we're going to talk steampunk and magic realism. And as I found out, some of my favorite films are part of the steampunk genre. So Cowboys and Aliens, Wild Wild West. So yeah, really, really pleased to be talking about it. Jordanne, over to you.
Hi, I'm Jordanne Fuller, and I do costuming, and I've done a few steampunk costumes. I am friends with a bunch of people from the Steampunk Society. I only haven't joined because of funds. You have to pay to get in. But I know a lot of people who are part of it, and I've talked to them about costumes, I've talked to them about history, I've talked to them about lots of different things. On top of that, I've written a novel set in a post-apocalyptic universe. I haven't published it yet, but that's only because I am very slow with editing. We're about 3 years ago now. But it has steampunk in it as well. All of the technology in it is steam technology, and it has a nod to Victorian times, although, as I'm sure we'll be talking about later, that's not entirely necessary to be considered steampunk. It's just, it kind of goes towards what people think is a stereotypical steampunk. There are zombies and vampires, and so that's a touch on the magical realism side. But on top of that, I have a prequel short story to it that has been published in the Mystical Vibes anthology that I'll still link there for you guys. So I'm fairly well versed in what is steampunk and what is like the variations on the genre and things like that.
There's so many things you have to like keep track of with this. It's very ADD. You're like, there's a feed over there, and there's someone talking, and then I'm Googling something. That sounds really cool, Jordanne. A full novel, I would really like to do that for sure. Isn't that cool? It's beautiful. Both of those images, and that's how I wrote the short story that I have in Uncommon Bodies, the anthology we just published. Is I found an image on DeviantArt, and I went, oh, I must write that story.
It's so good.
And
your story is so good.
Those are just so pretty. I've been following her. I just love the little clockwork dragon. Just the fact that he's kind of happy and he seems alive and just gorgeous. I love that art. I mean, so and I think DeviantArt is a neat place to go to find a lot of people who are really doing good work. It's kind of the indie world, I guess, of art design.
Yeah. Do you do that for your novels as well? The long, with long fiction, with long form fiction, do you find images inspire you for your chapters or your larger stories?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I think, I guess if I was an actress, it would be method acting. I go in Pinterest and I just find all these pictures and I stick them in a Pinterest file. I have them for all of the novels I've written. Mariposa. Before, when I started writing Mariposa, which was like 10 years ago, there wasn't Pinterest. So I just had a file on my computer. And then once Pinterest came out, I went and found most of those images again and put them out there. And it's a really good way of kind of collating. That's a good word for it. It's like a scrapbook. I think authors used to have these big bulletin boards, and some people still do this in their office, where they just put images they pulled out of magazines or whatever, and they would use those. And that's kind of what's cool about Pinterest as far as an author goes. You can do that, and you don't want to look at it if you haven't read the novel yet, because there's a lot of spoilers sometimes. Like, it'll show you places. I'm gonna post a link here. This is places that my novel takes place. It's got what my characters look like. There it is. This one here. It's got the clothes. It's got some of the things that are in there, and it's, what their hair should look like. And if you look, like the one that has like a short-haired girl with red hair, I gave that to my cover artist and said, this is what she looks like. And the cover artist completely nailed it. And he's a man from England, actually. His name is Lawrence Mann. And he did the art, and I just fell off the couch when I got it, because it was so pretty and perfect. And he just created that character for me. And I think that having that good image in your mind, yes, you can overdo it with description if you have those visuals, but you've got to know when to cut that. I cut 70,000 words from Mariposa, and it was probably mostly descriptions of the places in that Pinterest file. You didn't really need to know that, but it's good to have. I like it. That's the kind of stuff I like to read. I like to have all of those sensory details in there. So when an author puts it in there and I notice it has to feel sort of seamless. Like, you don't want to go, oh no, they're working in the sensory, because then there's too much of the man behind the curtain. But if you can have just that little mention of, oh, I sipped a cup of coffee, and it's a good staging technique too, because you don't have somebody monologuing. If you're saying, well, I told him that I loved him, and then I had a bite of my pie, and then he, because it just shows what they're doing and where they are. It grounds your characters in the real world, I think. So. Yeah,
I agree. I haven't done it before, but I'm beginning to do it now. I think especially because I have a lot more world building in the new series I'm writing, called Shoot the Moon, set in 2060, and it's a really interesting concept I'm exploring, where the Western civilizations have been they've kind of successive depressive economies have kind of destroyed the Western civilizations, and they're migrating to the East. That's kind of what I'm exploring in this one. And of course, in the background are these hybrids. And I mean, I've spent most of today trying to figure out, so, are my hybrids true hybrid? Are they really shapeshifters? Do they sort of move from being human to being wolves, or somewhere in between? And then I got really worried about stepping on, the werewolf lovers of the world and their rules. And I was like, well, do I need to keep track of the rules of the werewolf world? And actually, that's one of the things I wanted to talk about today with the two of you all. And I know I'm going a bit off topic with steampunk, and it's not exactly steampunk, but to what extent do you follow rules when you kind of create worlds? I mean, there's so much of established history around vampires and werewolves, and kind of a lot of these humanoid races that we've lived with. They're all there in our collective consciousness. So do we do you end up tracking down the rules and following them, or do you just make up your own rules as you go along? What do you think, Kim?
most of my stuff, and it works fine with magic realism too, is magic realism. And so it's realistic. It's a real world. San Antonio and New Orleans are the two main cities that I've done my novels in. And I do have to try to remember the rules of them. But since I did like Hoodoo Apocalypse, for example, is an apocalypse that is set in New Orleans when there's a magic apocalypse used with American voodoo. I call it hoodoo because it's different from the kind in Haiti. It's more Southern. It's got like Native American stuff mixed into it, and a lot of slave lore from New Orleans. It's sort of where it starts. And I had to remember those rules, and they were largely based on kind of voodoo mythology and stuff. But then I would put something of my own in there and try to work that in. And I'm going to definitely have to remember that when I write the sequel to it, which is coming up early next year. And I want to go up the Mississippi River up to Memphis and see what I do with poor Memphis. See if I can destroy them as badly as I did New Orleans. But yeah, I think you really need to be careful with that, because if you build your world and you've got some rule, there can be people who get so into your topic and your world building, and if you suddenly have your steampunk dragon with wings able to like be a cyborg or something, then people will go, wait, I thought it was steampunk. What happened here? So if you do change the rules or break them, you have to have a good reason for it. You have to make sure that it's justified within the narrative. And you can do that. I think we talked about this last time about like in Independence Day, the way the alien technology is brought down by a human computer virus. And I get it that they were basing it on H.G. Wells, which, by the way, is one of the steampunk precursors. H.G. Wells is War of the Worlds, where the aliens from Mars were brought down by human viruses. That's probably just as unlikely to happen. You know, aliens come in and they try to invade us, and our biology is so toxic for them that they die. I mean, that's what happened with First Contact in our world. You know, people from Europe went over to the continents and killed off a lot of natives. Happy Thanksgiving. It's kind of what happened, and they didn't mean to. The common cold just killed them. And so that's an important thing to remember when you're world building, is those rules. Do new people die when they encounter the old people? So, Jordanne, do you have any of that in your steampunk or your magic realism?
Yes, actually, that's something that I find really interesting. Like, one of the really examples of lately of people breaking the idea of what is expected of a particular magical creature or whatever. And I hate to talk about this because there's so much controversy for one, and for two, I'm not a fan of the series personally. I am a bit against people who are. I'm just going to put that out there. But Twilight changed the idea of what vampires are. And I personally am not happy about that, because I've always loved vampires, these scary creatures, because they were the one scary creatures that I wasn't afraid of. Now I feel like I wasn't afraid of them because they're women. And I'm no, I guess still not, because they're still strong. But now they feel superhuman to me, because I feel like she kind of wrecked vampires for me. I'm not saying that she did it for other people and each their own, but for me, she wrecked vampires. What I did to kind of make myself a bit happy about that is, in my story, the vampires are real vampires. They're scary. You don't want to be around them. And some of them are bestial. They're just like berserkers with fangs, basically. But I explain why. And I think, like you said, that's a really important thing to do. Explain why it's like that. Make sure you have a good foundation behind it. And if like for your story, how you were saying about like you citing your voodoo, you wanted to make sure that you remember that, write that all down, because it's going to be something that your readers will ask you for, unfortunately, if you don't. So, and that's something that's kind of not great about doing. You can't just be like, yeah, no, well, it's that because I said it's that. because your readers won't be very happy about that. You have to have a grounding base in reality within your story. So if your reality of your story is way out there, that's fine as long as it remains consistent. My coffee's really working today.
But what about the wider rules, right? So because there are so many people, I mean, it seems to me there are some established conventions when you write vampires or you write werewolves, you write zombies. There is a lot of fiction around this already, and there seem to be some accepted rules. And so, I mean, how free am I as a writer to break them? Or is it just me being confident and saying, well, this is how I see it. And, in my world, they are hybrids. They're not really pure shapeshifters. They are hybrids. And so they're actually people who have the faces of wolves. And that's just that's just how they are in my world.
I say go for it. Honestly, like I said, as long as you back it up, really, my way of thinking of it is if that's what your people call them, that's up to them. If that's what society has deemed them, if they've deemed them as hybrids, that's up to them. What if maybe your people are in a universe where they don't ever come up with the word werewolf? Like, somebody had to have coined that term at some point, right? So if your people call
I think if you come into I keep interrupting. I think if you come into a world that has a really big base of knowledge, like the vampire mythology, and you completely throw that out for something really different, you definitely have to have a justification for it. Like in the Twilight books, she doesn't really explain why the vampires are sparkly. I mean, why? What would cause that? And why would that mean they, have to live in the rainy place? And how'd they figure it out? And what did they do before the rainy place showed up? Because, there are vampires in some lore all the way back to cave people. And so you have to deal with that or completely ignore it, and make sure you say, I'm completely ignoring this somehow in your story. You can't just throw out what everybody else has said. It'd be like, I'm going to write some Star Trek fan fiction, but I'm going to not have Klingon in it. I'm not going to explain why. And that's important. I think you just kind of have to deal with these conventions already, or like someone said, just don't give your readers whiplash. Or people are going to have, there's a concept called willing suspension of disbelief, which is what I was kind of getting at earlier with the Independence Day discussion, Spike. I know that's a good picture of him too. You can't make your reader go, what? And pull up out of the narrative. As long as they're still fine with going with that willing suspension of disbelief and willing to go with you with your story, you're doing fine. Like with your hybrids, I had no problem with that. And I know you're thinking of trying to delve into kind of the origins of your hybrids. As long as you don't suddenly have, something, there's the GIMP there. So you don't have suddenly something that makes people go, huh? I don't get it. And I think Twilight did an okay job of not making that happen. Of course, it was aimed at young readers who don't have that history behind them of reading all the vampire lore and watching all the movies. So they might have, and by the way, it's interesting to think about the fact that genre, that series is going to define what vampires are for the people who started there. Because it's always the one you hear. Even if the song you heard was the remake, that's the one you think of as the original. And then you find out, well, Me and Bobby McGee was recorded by Chris Christopherson. Oh, that's so wrong. It's totally Janice's song. So that's the thing that you deal with especially when you're dealing with genre fiction, is you have to, I think you just have to be the most nerdy person ever to write this well, because you have to know all of that stuff. And you can ignore it, but you still really ought to know it. That it comes back to, if you want to be a writer, you need to read. You need to read everything. You need to, read everything. And maybe watch all the pop culture too these days. You can't be an intelligent, this is going to be controversial. You can't be an intelligent person in this world and say, I never watch TV and I never watch movies. You can, obviously, but you're not going to have that pop culture intelligence, that IQ of, saying to someone, like I keep joking about the GIMP with Pavarti saying, I have one in my basement. If you don't know where that comes from, You don't get the joke, and you just think, what are they talking about? When I teach literature, actually, I teach a book called How to Read Literature Like a Professor. And it's an excellent, excellent book. I highly recommend it for writers and readers, because what it does is it goes through and it talks about the big, I think it's like 20 to 30 metaphors and tropes that appear in literature. Like if it's a vampire, it's not really about vampires. It's really about power. And sometimes it's about terrible things like rape and destruction of youth and beauty. Like, do you know Tess of the D'Urbervilles is sort of a vampire story? It kind of is when you get down to it.
Yeah.
And so when you learn all of those things and you write about them and read about them, you understand more about the literature that you're reading and creating. So you have to be a reader. You have to read everything there ever was. Go to the library. Nowadays, you can just get a good Kindle, I guess. So I'm talking too much.
Yeah.
This is Professor Syndrome.
No, I was kind of, just a couple of thoughts that came out as you were talking. So I think so two things, right? In terms of pop culture. So there's this, I don't know if you saw the New York Times today had this whole story about Adele, and the fact that Adele, who doesn't spend any time on social media, has created like this amazing record. And that was kind of their headlines. And so there was this whole thing about, well, is that the only thing you picked up about the fact that Adele doesn't spend time on social media? Or for that matter, if I take Björk, she doesn't spend any time online, but look at the stuff she creates. It's so powerful, and it's kind of speculative music, isn't it? So I guess I have to challenge you on that one, Kim, about whether you need to be plugged into everything happening around you in the way that everybody else is, or is there a way of plugging into collective consciousness in a different way? Maybe I'm Björk and I live in Iceland and I have nature, I have all this wild nature, and I have mythology, I have Icelandic mythology to tap into, and the weird people I come across in everyday life, in real life. And so I create stuff because I'm defining pop culture in a way, right? Or maybe I'm Adele, and I've kind of gone away for how many ever months or years, and I have sort of created my own kind of music, and I've come out with it. And so, do you really need to, as a writer, be that much in touch with popular culture? I don't know. It's a question.
I feel like you should be at least aware of it, even if you don't partake. So being aware of the fact, like I said, I'm not a fan of Twilight. I saw the first movie. It's a funny sidebar. I saw it before all the special effects were put in, because I had a friend who bought me a ripped version. So I watched it, and it was so funny. He stepped into the light, and he's like, "This is what happens when I step into the light," and nothing happened. And I started yelling at the television. I was like, "Nothing happened. So you're perfect then. Nothing happened. What is wrong with you? Why are you so angsty all the time?" And I was sitting there yelling at the television for a good 10 minutes. And I was with a bunch of people. We were all watching it together, and they had to tell me to shut up. But so it was actually kind of funny, because I was just like, what? I have never read the Twilight series. I've never seen any more than the first movie, and I even saw that in in a bad version, probably the worst version that you possibly could. And I got enough of the storyline with friends who told me what happened, and not like completely unbiased reviews of what happened. And I looked up on it just to be aware of what it was. And I think that as long as you're aware of the culture, like aware that Twitter is something that exists, and you're able to kind of channel that whether you need to or not, is kind of important. I'm sure Björk, she's got to be aware of social media, because she's in media. She has to be and Adele, I know that she's aware of social media, even if she doesn't partake. So I think showing that awareness, and they're not showing it, but having that awareness and having an awareness of pop culture means that you have the means to kind of access it. You have the means to go and research it. And I think I think there's some things where you can be completely oblivious to that, and you can still produce good stuff, but it won't be quite as meaningful to people of the time who follow that kind of thing because it's what they find intriguing. But I'm saying, like, you can draw art from and inspiration from everywhere, so you don't necessarily need to. But I feel like it kind of lends a better hand if you do have the awareness of pop culture. That's my opinion.
Well, and I'd have to say two things about your question, Laxmi. A, I doubt it. I think the image of saying, "Oh, she doesn't even go on Twitter," that's just an image people want to project. Oh, she's this starving artist in a garret. She's not starving anymore, but she's just away from all of this craziness. They're trying to separate themselves from someone like, say, Kim Kardashian or the other ones, the young Chloe, the ones that tweet their food and their butt and all of this stuff every other minute, and are famous for only that. They have they have talent in self-promotion, and that's it. Whereas Adele or Bjork,
that's a topic for another blab. So I won't interrupt you on that now, but go ahead.
Well, they have this talent in self-promotion, and I guarantee that someone on Adele's team tweets, and someone on Adele's team knows everything about social media and all of those things, and she's got that team behind her. So does Bjork at a certain point. And also, she started off her career before the social media happened, and she was able to build that buzz. If you go on and you're someone like, say, Madonna, and you have a social presence and you post things that people don't get or they don't like, that can actually be harmful to your career. I've seen people say, I'm not following her anymore because of what she said about Lady Gaga. And there's like wars and stuff that start with this. And if you're in the public eye and you know nothing about the pop culture and the media of the time, sure, you can do that if you're Adele. I mean, she's so incredibly talented. I mean, I was watching her on the Jimmy Fallon show where they sang Hello with just schoolroom instruments. And I was like, man, she's talented to be able to basically go a cappella. In maybe it's a studio, and sound that amazing. Very few people can pull that off. Very few people can pull off being the isolated, what's her name? To Kill a Mockingbird, to be Harper Lee and stay out of the world for 50 years and have your book then sell 4 billion copies, which I have issues with that. That's another blab topic to talk about. But very few people can do that. I wish I was. I wish I'd sold 4 billion copies of my novels and could then ignore the world and be a recluse. I always say I'd like to be rich enough to be eccentric.
Yeah, I agree.
Or you're just crazy. If you're rich, then you get to be called eccentric. So I'm working on that. I'd like to be that. Someday, maybe. I can dream.
I'm okay being crazy.
You're okay being crazy?
Yeah, I'm well aware of my insanity.
Well, I think crazy is just, we said last time that any kind of technology sufficiently advanced to a culture that doesn't have it could appear to be magic. So any kind of quirkiness could appear to be crazy. You can just sort of change it up a little. So, but with world building and, magic realism, people ask me sometimes, what is magic realism? And I'll say, well, and I'll try to think of it, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And they'll go, no, not really. I'll say, well, how about Salvador Dali? Because magic realism sort of starts off in the arts, the visual arts. Yeah. So you have this realistic world where the clocks all melt.
Yeah.
The camel thing. I'm not sure what it is. And you're just thinking, what is this about? Why are they doing this? And almost always there's a reason behind it. If it's magic realism, it's not just because of, I just kind of wanted to throw some sparkly vampires in there. It's, a political reason or social commentary of some kind. And if you're a true master of that, this. Like, again, to harp on them, and God, I hope I don't, well, it'd be actually kind of cool to be get their crowd hating me because then I'd get popular. But the Kardashians, like the younger sisters wrote a book like last year, I think. And it was like they went on again. I watch a lot of Jimmy Fallon. That's what I watch when I'm working out. Yay, Jimmy Fallon. And they went on and he was like, what's your book about? And they were like, oh, I didn't. And I was like, oh, what's your ghostwriter's book about? Because obviously they did not write it. They just heard that it would be cool to write. And maybe it's true. Maybe they did to disclaimer it. I'm not saying they didn't, but it seems a little odd for someone to come out and not really be able to even talk intelligently about their book. And maybe they were shy. The Kardashians are shy.
Yeah, right. Sorry. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right. Magic realism for me is something where, it's kind of real, but it's not. So there's something happening which is completely unexpected and a bit out of this world and a bit surreal, and everything else is real in that world. And it kind of really fascinates me because I think there's so much of the unseen around us. And certainly maybe it's just me, but I kind of sense the unseen a lot in everyday life. And I think that's why when I write, I tend to veer towards magic realism. Also because it's more fluid than sci-fi, I think. Somehow when I think sci-fi, I think there is almost a lot more rules, even though sci-fi is part of speculative fiction, but it's almost like there are more rules. And sci-fi is more, for me, black and white, more steel, more sort of straight lines. Magic realism for me is more like water. It's more fluid, and you can sort of interpret it in many different ways. And so there's something quite hypnotic to it. Yeah, that's kind of how I see it, that I can feel it. I don't know how else to explain it. So that's kind of what attracts me to magic realism. But I have to say, the only magic realism I really read, and this is why I want to debate this point with you, Kim, about reading and writing. So I agree you need to read to write, but I can tell you the only magic realism I really read was Salman Rushdie. I'm very influenced by Rushdie. And as I found out today, I was talking to another friend, Rushdie is very influenced by Angela Carter. And so my friend Jule, who read my last work, she keeps telling me my works, I'm kind of a very mainstream Angela Carter, and I've never read Angela Carter, but I've read Rushdie, and and I think my aim is to sort of be a more accessible Rushdie, somebody. So it's quite. I know I write quite complex, and there are many layers to it, but I kind of want to unpick those layers as I go along and make it a lot more accessible. But I can tell you, other than that, I haven't read much magic realism, which is why it always fascinates me that when I write, it tends to veer off more towards this kind of unseen space. And, I used to call it fantasy, then fantastical, and now I tend to call it more magic realism. So I guess the question is, do you have to read the genre you write to write that genre? What do you think?
Honestly, you're going to do a richer job if you're reading it. But remember, I'm the English teacher. So I think all of you need to start with Beowulf and The Wanderer, and then go to Chaucer and read all of that, and then read all of Shakespeare, like for next week, maybe get this done. And then all of Shakespeare, and then all of the Romantics, and all of Virginia Woolf, and then Mary Shelley, and all of that. Just get busy and read it all, because that's how I feel. Because to me, you have homework, and there will be a test. As long as there's no math, I'm good. But that's kind of what I think. I mean, it doesn't mean that I'm right, but I find that I'm drawn to the writers who are richer in their knowledge of this kind of stuff. I mean, I'm doing a lot of interviews. I'm doing a blog tour in December. And so I'm doing a lot of interviews with blogs, and they say, name some writers that you're influenced by, because everyone wants to know this. Yeah, Harry Potter. I really love Alice Hoffman, who wrote Practical Magic. There was a movie of it with Sandra Bullock a few years ago. Some people hated it, but I still like it. Charles DeLint is another author who does great. He calls it urban fantasy, and his worlds just, I just want to be in them because they're so rich. He does Native American myth in his stories, and then a lot of kind of Celtic myth in his stories, and it makes it very rich. And there are people who I read who they say something like, well, I don't put those details in there. I figure the reader will make them up. And sometimes you can, but then sometimes I really want to know, where did that come from? And it's just kind of me as a reader, it's what I'm drawn to. So I find that I read those kind of writers more often. I don't I don't read mystery fiction as much, and I don't read traditional romance as much, and I don't read like the spy novels. I have read all of the Angels and Demons, but I don't read those because they don't call to my soul. Someone said earlier, how do you know it's there if it's unseen? Because I read it and I have that book hangover and I want to live in that world and I dream about it. As much as everybody gets mad at him, the writer who did the Wheel of Time stories, Robert Jordan, he did like 12 massive books and they went on for 20 something years and we all were like, oh, please finish it. And finally, when he finished it, it was so amazing. And George R.R. Martin, for example, he does the same thing where people are like, finish the book. That to me is where my soul resides. And I have all these odd little fictional theories about like alternate universes, and writers get to tap into those other universes that really exist, and we're just writing about them. Blame Heinlein and the Number of the Beast or that one, if you've read that novel. And it's just chaos theory and all of this stuff. And I just think that's kind of where really great writing comes from. And you might be hearing my son stomping on the ceiling there. No, good. He's making the lights flicker, which is kind of fun. But to me, that's what makes things richer. I don't know. Again, I'm the English teacher, so I'm always going to give you homework. That's what's going to happen. Have fun with the homework. I won't make you write a paper unless maybe you just consider the novel as the paper, I suppose. Write that novel. Make sure you get your citation style right, or I'm going to take off points.
Oh, no. I always lose points with citation.
I was going to ask, are we considering vampires as part of magic realism?
I think they are, because they're fantasy, they're fiction. They're considered paranormal, but I think paranormal is just a new way of saying fantasy. They don't exist in our world. They're not real, as far as I know. I mean, if some people like to pretend they're vampires, or they appear to or call themselves vampires, that's up to them. But the way that they're described in most novels, they don't actually exist. And I feel that any time something doesn't actually exist, it's fantasy. It's a fantasy that somebody has. And I know that it's technically fiction, but at the same time, I mean, there's some things that are fiction without being fantasy, because they're something that are possible to exist in our world. Whereas vampires, with what we have right now, it does not seem like it's possible. So that's just how I look at it. Anything that is fantastical is fantasy. So I've been told that my steampunk stuff is actually just urban fantasy. Something that annoyed me, because steampunk stuff, I'm not going to get into it. But yeah, that's, I think as long as they're fantastical, it's considered fantasy.
Well, and then you get into science, and you find like the stories that came out a little bit ago about people getting blood exchanges to make them live longer. I mean, that's scientific technology that they're trying to develop. And who knows where that could go. That's where speculative comes in again, because you go, I'm going to speculate on what bad or good could happen. Yeah. If this technology gets out there, unwatched, unsupervised, people can get blood transfusions. A couple years ago, right at Thanksgiving time, I got bit by a stray cat, and there's a connection here. And the vet said, well, I don't think you really need to get a rabies shot. And I was like, what? Rabies? This is a possibility? This is on the table here? And at the same time, I was still trying to work on this. I was a little concerned. We watched this movie that night about like not donation. People could buy organs, like you have a faulty heart, and if their lease went up on it, they could come take it back. And it felt kind of surreal to me to be watching this thing about people being hunted down by the organ repo man, and at the same time where I was feeling really stressed about my own physical health with the rabies scare, which I did not have, thank God. I didn't turn into a werewolf. That's what you turn into with rabies. And but it's part of it. It is coming. I mean, they just did a full face transplant on a man who was a firefighter who was injured, and he lost his whole face, and they put someone else's face on him. And weirdly enough, he looks like he did in his old pictures. And I was saying, how did that happen? And someone said, well, the underlying muscles and all of that probably is what makes you look like what you look like. But it still feels like magic to me because he still looks the same, even though he got some donor face. And maybe they did it. Maybe they worked to try and get someone who kind of looked like him. It's possible that they did that. But how hard would that be? You know, you need someone who's a donor to go and look like you and donate their face, you know, to science and get that to work. It's pretty incredible. And I think it's all the magic. Any science sufficiently advanced is magic. And we could have vampires. It could happen. I mean, we do kind of. We have spiritual vampires all the time. That person that sucks the life out of you, even if you just walk past them. But
we call them energy vampires, don't we? The ones who kind of suck all the energy out of a room or out of a person. And I think someone made a really good point here. Lively debate about how, you know, about enjoying Harry Potter because J.K. Rowling made magic feel very mundane, like a normal part of everyday life. And I think there's something to that, this whole sort of tension between the mundane and then something very different happening. And that to me quintessentially is magic realism because it's kind of magic yet real. So it's sort of something that comes through and disrupts your everyday. And then there's this kind of strange tension and you have to find a way to make them live together. Yeah, so I think that for me really does define magic realism. And I do think that's why more and more I am attracted to it. And I do wonder if that is not my default genre because maybe that's how I want to live life, right? Like sort of everything's going normal and then something just drops in out of the blue sky, out of, you know, or crawls out of somewhere and disrupts everything and changes everything and then kind of try to figure out how to deal with it. And that's what makes for the most interesting stories and the most interesting experiences. I mean, isn't that why we want to travel? We want to go traveling to distant lands because you sort of, you know, you're traveling for days and days and nothing happens. And then suddenly you meet somebody or you come across something very, very unexpected and it's kind of almost surreal. And I kept thinking about The Alchemist. You know, I read parts of The Alchemist, not all of it, but it's kind of this very classic journey story for me, you know, the road trip, sort of journeying through the desert. And it's almost every artist has to go through it, isn't it? You journey through the desert and then you sort of go into the dark night and then just when you think all is lost, there is a revelation. You know, you come across the magic man who tells you something that reveals something. Anyway.
And now you're just getting into the Joseph Campbell hero myth, you know, and that you got the call and the wise leader and the quest and you become you're the fool and you become the wise leader yourself and have to lead someone else. And I put a lot of myth and fairy tale sometimes in my work too. And I think fairy tale and myth, I mean that TV show Grimm that is so popular, that's what it's doing. It's magic realism because it's saying, oh, what if the werewolf really does exist, but you can't see them every day? And again, it's always the human story because there are werewolves. You know, there are people who feel like two different types of people who feel bestial at times. They have anger management maybe or something. And there are people who are like this because this is what we do when we study fiction and when we write fiction and when we read it. We are exploring the alien within ourselves and we're exploring the magic within ourselves. And the Grimm fairy tales are very, very dark. I always tell students this when I teach it. You know, Cinderella is not the story you think it is. It's not Disney's version. And there are some brilliant writers that are writing this kind of stuff. Like Shauna McGuire has a series she's dealing with. She does it too, all over in her work. She has fairy tales, she has myth, and this is what I'm drawn to. Like, I don't really read the New York Times bestsellers usually, kind of literary fiction. Even though I have a freaking PhD in literature, people always assume I'm going to know the big literary people of the moment, and I say no, that's not really what I read. Because I like to think about the magic in everyday things, and there is magic. It might not be that I can jump off my house like in Practical Magic and fly, but just the act of not killing someone on Black Friday, maybe that's magic. I don't know. That's something we need to explore more.
I think that one of the reasons why, like, I feel drawn to magical realism as well. I don't know how many of you saw last week's blog that I was on, and I was saying how it's interesting because in Uncommon Bodies, it's probably the only work that I did that isn't considered magical realism. And everything else I have put out is all magical realism. And I think the reason we gravitate towards it is because when we put it in a world that is recognizable to us, or that mimics our own or is our own, it makes the mundane feel more exciting. It makes it seem like a possibility if you're a good enough writer. Also, if you're the writer, like if you're writing it and start reading it, you feel like you're living out your fantasy because it's in your world. It's not in a world that you created out of nowhere. And you're like, I mean, you can also in our world, but it's not a world that you come up with, so it doesn't feel like you feel removed from it. With magical realism, because it's in our world, because it's part of our lives in a way, or you're bringing your own life into it. I feel like I'm kind of. I think Kim wins.
I'm getting
right. You're kind of zooming there.
Friday reference. I can bring up Walmart too. I'm sorry that distracted you, Jordanne. Go on.
No worries. You didn't do it.
I want to live in a world where magic realism is real. I mean, that's my fantasy too. I really do. Like when I read, in fact, I talk about it in Mariposa, my first novel. One of the characters talks about wanting to live in Charles DeLint's universe. And here's the thing. There is always some very dark things about that, like the Grimm's fairy tales. But that's what humans are. Humans are dark and terrible. The wolves are not hidden in the forest. They are negative points for Walmart. Sorry, I don't go there. But the wolves are all around us, and there's a really cool movie a few years ago with Kiefer Sutherland and what's her name? Brooke Shields is in it, and I'm trying to remember the girl, the one that does Legally Blonde. Alicia Silverstone.
Blue Lagoon. No, not Blue Lagoon. That's no, not Blue Lagoon. It's
called Freeway. And no, not Blue Lagoon. It's called Freeway, if I'm not mistaken. And she's trying to run away from home, and she goes out on the freeway, and I think it's California, and she meets up with Kiefer Sutherland, who is a wolf. He's a real big bad wolf, and he's a terrible person. It's a dark movie, but it's really good too. And Brooke Shields is sort of a cameo in it. She's not got a big part. But I teach it when I talk about fairy tale because it's a type of fairy tale in modern culture. And it's sort of like, it's sort of like magic realism. And it's like, of course you can encounter the big bad wolf. And he might eat you. People do all the time. And that's the danger. That's why these stories are there, by the way. They weren't intended as bedtime stories for children. They were intended to warn people. Don't go off with that prince because he might stick you in a glass coffin. He might kill you. He might cut your head off if you open that room. And sometimes it was literal. So the fairy tales were intended for royalty to read and learn about the world. And by, we have sort of sanitized them with the Disney did a little bit and turned them into something that children watch. But then you see something like Pretty Woman, right? I mean, that's the Cinderella story, except she's a prostitute. Maybe that is more realistic. I mean, it is more what the world is like now. And that's just as magic as anything else. Like a prostitute's going to find a rich guy who's going to fall madly in love with her and take her away.
Well,
That's really going to happen.
That's my real issue with it, that, I think all of modern media teaches us or tells us about this knight in shining armor. And the fact is, there is no knight in shining armor. You are your own knight in shining armor. And I just don't, I think I have a fundamental issue with this whole concept of someone coming to save you, when the fact is you have to look inside to save you and not outside. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's me done for that.
I think that's part of it. I mean, and the story still references those. And if you've never watched the Prince and Knight in Shining Armor story, you're not going to get that part of the movie. And sometimes you're not going to understand, there's a meme that goes around that drives me crazy sometimes, where it's this pie chart and it says what your English teacher thinks the blue curtains mean and what the blue curtains really meant. And I always say, A, as an English teacher, yes, the blue curtains meant something. And B, as a writer, of course, if I'm going to take time to mention the color of those freaking curtains, then them being blue is significant. It is the protagonist's nightmare. It means water. It means something. It's an alien environment that I created, and I made the rules up, just like you're talking about earlier, Laxmi, is we make the rules up. And so it's on purpose. The reason why the hero's hair is red, that's on purpose. And maybe some authors do not think about it. They don't do it, but I do. And that's the kind of readers I am, the writers I am, the readers I read, the writers I read. I promise there is not vodka in that glass. It might seem like it, but that's what I like, and it's kind of a thing.
Sorry, Jordanne, you were saying something?
I was just going to say that I had the same rant not too long ago. I said the exact same thing. If I'm taking time to write that the curtains are blue, there's a reason for it. Otherwise, why mention the curtains? And my fiance said, well, you're trying to set the scene. I'm like, yes, but they'll be blue because the character likes blue. And if the character just likes blue, that says something about them. Psychologically, we like colors that speak to us for reasons. Like, there's reasons behind everything we do as humans. So if you're a writer and you're going to put something in it as minuscule as that, it's going to have a reason. Even if you don't notice it, even if you don't yourself know why. I've written stuff that I kind of was in a bit of a trance to write. I mean, I don't actually go into trances and write, but sometimes my mind takes over and it kind of goes on its own thing, and I just write it all down. And then later I'll come back to it and be like, wow, there's some real symbolism in this, because psychologically I'm just infused, associate blue with depression, or it depends on the shade of blue too, or if a room is bright, the person's usually in a better mood, and I don't always do it on purpose. And I think that's a big thing too, is the curtains aren't ever just blue for no reason. There's a reason, or else people are going to put it in.
Right. And I mean, when I was in high school, I remember getting frustrated with my English teacher saying, well, why does an apple mean temptation and sin? That's so stupid. It's just an apple. But it's lack of knowledge that historically those apples have gotten us in trouble. And there's a reason for that. And if you're using the apple in your story, you very much chose to use an apple instead of a banana. The character could have eaten a banana. Maybe that's what you were eating while you were writing it. But you choose to put it in there and have it be an apple. And the author means that. I wrote a poem one time where I was writing about white flowers. And I called the flowers, I was actually being realistic, because the flowers I was writing about were bridal wreath flowers. And so my poetry professor said, well, what's the symbolism of the bridal wreath flowers? And I was like, there's no symbolism to those. It's just the flowers that the little lizard was eating. And she said, no, you can't do that. If it's just white flowers, just say white flowers. Don't say bridal wreath. Because your reader that knows is going to think, oh, bridal wreath, it must be about, brides. And if it's not, then you're cheating yourself and your reader. If it is, then you're adding an extra layer of intensity to it.
And just picking up on the point made by lively debate again about this whole skill of the author to mention something in passing, and maybe the reader doesn't notice it, but actually it's really important to your story. And I think that's something you pick up as you write more about how you're sort of giving these cues. Everything you do, the adjectives you use, the descriptions you use or not use, the situations you put your characters into or not, all of it is a cue to the reader, leading them on the journey towards this final destination. And as a writer, I've realized, as I write, of course, when I write in my first draft, a lot of it is very intuitive and instinctive. But then when I go back and look at it, I now question why I did that. And every time I'm unsure about something, that's what I have to do. Go back and ask the question, why is it white and not blue? Why is right down to why is the name of this character X and not Y? Right. Because there is a reason it is. And if you're not able to justify it, then I think you need to revisit that premise. But it's certainly something which I think is really important. And if you want to make an impact as a writer, and I think if you want to sort of stay with your reader longer, these below the surface cues are, they're really critical to your writing, isn't it? I mean, that's something which I have learned along the way. Yeah.
Well, and it's, I like a good brain candy book. It's the beach read. It's Sex in the City. You're on the beach. You're just reading about smutty, trips to the bathroom. That's the wrong metaphor. Smutty trip to the bedroom. I was thinking about bathroom encounter. Don't go there. But sometimes you're on the beach and that's what you want. You want brain candy. You want something completely pointless. It doesn't give you any nutritional value. But
is it completely pointless? I mean, why is it that Sarah Jessica Parker lives in Manhattan and not Brooklyn? Why does SJP always have a tall latte and not a cappuccino?
It is part of that. Yeah, it's definitely part of that. But other times you want, like, I don't know, Moby Dick. Where there's a lot, it's a dense, and it's a big meal. It's a meal of broccoli and liver and things that are very hard to digest. I don't know what else. I don't eat liver, but so sometimes you want the brain candy. And yeah, I know Sarah Jessica Parker, Sex in the City.
I know. I just like to challenge you, Kim. So
I think I'm
gonna give you a B.
I think there's a difference too between setting a scene, so using imagery to set a scene, and then using imagery to add depth. Like, for example, the reason that they live in Manhattan, the reason that they drink lattes versus espressos is because it shows that they are socialites. It shows that they are in their particular class system. They're women who make a lot of money. Whereas if she always wore red shoes, it might show that she's like red pumps. It shows that she's a woman who is in power and uses that to boost her self-esteem if she has like diminished self-esteem or something like that.
Right.
So I think that there's a difference too between using imagery to set a very obvious theme and tone versus imagery to show an underlying depth to your story. And I'm not saying that Sex and the City is devoid of that. I actually don't know. I'm just saying that those particular examples, it is kind of an overlying, although it's still good. They still did a good job with that. It's an overlying way for them to show that they are socialites. They're women that make a lot of money. They're women who are powerful to their own and stuff like that. If that makes any sense, I don't know if that makes any sense. I think that.
Well, and there's a reason why that show resonated with people so much. And I mean, gosh, they inspired the Cosmopolitan. I didn't know what a Cosmopolitan was before that, and I loved them. And all the different things.
The Cosmopolitan. That's another cue right there. Why was it a Cosmopolitan
and not a margarita? It makes
exactly.
Definitely does, and that's good layered fiction does that. The things we don't like, I think, don't do it. We kind of lose our interest in it faster. It makes it richer. It doesn't mean that it's not also entertaining. I mean, ultimately, what we're doing is art. And art is short for artifice. It's all fake, and it's all for fun. and we do it because we want to do something that we want to do. Probably, I mean, I'm not Stephen King yet. I don't have billions of dollars from it, but we're doing it for the fun of sharing that idea with someone and them going, oh, when this happened, I was so excited that you put that in there. And sometimes it's just verisimilitude, which means it seems like that's what the world is like. If you're in New Orleans and you don't mention beignets, you're a terrible writer. You're not. But I was. That's what I had to do. And so that's just kind of the rules. Those rules of writing. And I just noticed, by the way, that it is now noon. So our hour is up.
I know.
We get such a live little debate going after a while, and it's a lot of fun. We definitely have to keep doing this.
Totally
and lively debate. We'll give it a try. The writing. Laxmi had the idea of doing like a live stream of writing something, like just sort of reality TV.
No, I know. I'd like to do that, Kim. It's kind of like Twitch. Have you heard of Twitch? Where they kind of focus the camera on people as they're watching TV. And I was like, that would be so much fun if you focus the camera on a writer as they're trying the painful process of writing. Imagine doing that for like 8 hours or 6 hours would probably
a lot of video of me going.
Yeah.
As I'm researching, it would probably not be that attractive. Wait, I need to look up how to kill somebody with this drug.
I talk to myself a lot when I'm writing too. Like I'll talk
I do too.
The conversation sometimes, or like I'll mouth it. So a lot of people be like,
maybe we could record it and then show it later if it doesn't show us doing terrible things, fighting my fingernails a lot. Okay, so that means though that we're done with our recording for the day, and this has been a fun chat. Thank you, Jordanne, and of course, as always, my co-host Laxmi. And next week we're talking about maybe looking into what were we saying, slipstream, and what that is. Yeah,
buzzword, slipstream. Someone else mentioned it to me today, so definitely.
It's a cool phrase. Daniel Smith, who's also in the Uncommon Bodies anthology we just launched, he calls me Southern Slipstream. And I think, okay, I can go with that. That sounds really sexy. So we will try to we should get him on here. He gives good video. And he's got that nice thick
Daniel gives good video. Okay.
He does. He gives me good video. He's going to kill me for saying that. We have had one Skype where we were debating writerly issues.
Yes. I love the idea of a speed writing blab too. You have 2 minutes to write a paragraph or two. We'll see if it helps bring out the underlying.
That would be fun.
We should definitely try that.
We should do that. And just because we're starting off with this once a week thing doesn't mean we have to stay with that forever. We can do special times. Because I know some of the writers in the anthology were saying that they can't make 10, 11 o'clock on Saturday morning. It's difficult for me sometimes too, because I have the family jumping around. Did you guys notice the lights flickering for a while? I was like, I'm very spooky. It's just this office. Anyway, we definitely sign off and keep talking about this. We will keep the conversation going. We promise. So thanks for coming. And have a wonderful week and keep watching. Thank you.
Bye.
Pause recording.